The locomotive hissed like a moribund serpent as it entered the station, brakes screeching against the steel. Dust from the prairie adhered to every surface, settling on wood, metal, and sweat-dampened brows. Rachel Bell remained seated until the train shuddered to a halt, her gloved hands quivering in her lap. One hand rested protectively over her abdomen, as if to shield her child from impending events. The conductor's announcement was inaudible to her, and passengers began to alight. Travelers with sun-weathered hats, ranchers returning from cattle auctions, women with parasols and strained smiles. Rachel rose, straightened her pre-owned dress, and reached for the small leather valise beneath her feet. It was damaged at the seams, much like the heart she bore. She descended from the train into a parched heat that stung her cheeks. The town was diminutive, scarcely more than a single thoroughfare lined with saloons, a church, a general store, and a partially painted sheriff's office. Everything else extended into an unending expanse of ochre, the high desert plains, scattered with scrub and hills that glinted in the sun like shattered glass. Rachel adjusted her shawl to hide her protuberant belly, though at nearly 6 months along, it was almost impossible. Still, she persisted. She always persisted. Her heart pounded as she surveyed the waiting countenances. He was not difficult to identify. Horace Keeler stood at the far end of the platform, arms crossed, boots polished, mustache trimmed. He appeared to be the sort of man who issued commands and expected unquestioning obedience. His hat was broad-brimmed, black and immaculate, as if it had never encountered dirt, only authority. He held the letter she had dispatched clutched in one hand. As she neared, his gaze shifted from her face to her belly. It froze there. The silence was dense. Rachel offered a gentle smile. "Mr. Keeler, I am Rachel Bell from our correspondence." "You're," he said. The smile wavered. "Yes, I mentioned I was a widow. My fiancé passed away just before our intended marriage." "You did not state you were with child." "I thought," she swallowed. "I thought perhaps that would not be a concern. I am a proficient cook, I can sew, and I am in good health. I work diligently. I wish to begin anew." He stared at her as if she had expectorated in his coffee. "You did not state you were impaired." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words emerged. The sun seemed to beat down more intensely than before. All sounds appeared to vanish from the platform. Even the wind held its breath. "I came here," she said at last, her voice trembling, "because I believed your letter. You said you desired a woman with strong principles, a woman of faith, a family." "I did not mean someone else's family," he snapped. "I require a proper wife, one who does not arrive with encumbrances." People were turning now, observing. A few travelers paused to witness the spectacle. One woman whispered behind a fan. Rachel's ears rang. "I spent all my funds to travel here," she said. "Please just allow me to explain." Horace tore the letter in half, directly in front of her, then let the pieces fall to the ground. "I require no further explanation. You should have remained in the East." He turned and walked away without another word. Rachel stood alone as her suitcase overturned, its contents spilling onto the dust. 2 dresses, a worn Bible, a ribbon intended for the baby's crib. She dropped to her knees, scrambling to retrieve everything with shaking hands. The tears did not come immediately. They arrived slowly, hot and shaming. She suppressed them. Eyes were upon her, watching, judging. One small boy pointed and asked his mother why the lady was weeping. The mother pulled him away as if Rachel carried a contagion. She rose, stuffed the last of her belongings into the case, and walked down the street with no destination, no plan, just a heartbeat that resonated twice, hers and her child's. Every door she passed was shut. She requested water at the saloon and was informed it was not for her sort. She tried the general store, but the proprietor would not meet her gaze. By the time the sun was descending behind the hills, Rachel sat beneath the covered porch of the derelict stagecoach office, clutching her case like a means of survival. Her shoes were scuffed, her throat parched, and her belly heavy. Her baby shifted, and she whispered to it, "I am so sorry. I thought we were going somewhere favorable." A wind arose, dry and cold, gusting. It dragged dust along the street, rattled shutters, and carried with it the sharp aroma of distant fire. Her dress whipped around her knees. Then she heard footsteps, boots, slow, deliberate. She looked up. The man was tall, over 6 feet, with a broad build and rugged features that bespoke labor and hardship. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, his duster long and weather-beaten. A revolver hung at his side, but his hands were empty. He stopped just short of the porch and said nothing. Rachel rose slowly, prepared to withdraw. He tipped his hat back. His eyes were gray, steady. "Do you have a destination?" She shook her head, wary. "No." "Do you have anyone to assist you?" Another shake. He nodded towards the edge of town. "I have a place. Nothing elaborate, but it possesses a stove and a roof that does not leak. You and the infant can rest there if you wish." She squinted at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "It is not right what transpired. That is not your concern. I do not reckon it is. Still, it is not right." She stared at him. He did not leer, did not glance at her belly. He looked her in the eye, then at the suitcase, and then at the sky. "Storm's approaching," he added, as if to substantiate his point. Thunder rumbled over the hills. Rachel hesitated for another breath before finally nodding. He reached out, not for her, but for the suitcase, picked it up as if it weighed nothing, then turned, not checking if she followed. She did. The walk was quiet. The town receded behind them. The man led her along a narrow path through scrub and juniper trees until they reached a modest cabin situated at the edge of a dry creek bed. Smoke curled from a chimney. Inside, it was dim but warm. A fire burned in the hearth. The floor was swept clean. There were 2 chairs, a cot, a table, and a simple kitchen with a stew pot simmering. He placed her suitcase by the cot. "Rest. You appear to be in need of it." Rachel finally inquired, "What is your name?" He turned, paused, then said, "Elias. Elias Hart." She sat on the cot, bone-weary and numb. "I am Rachel." I surmised. He turned back to the stove and stirred the stew without another word. She watched him in the firelight. His movements were unhurried but not indolent. There was something contained beneath his calm, a man who had encountered trouble and reconciled with it. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. The baby kicked. She placed her hand over the movement, blinking rapidly. Elias broke the silence again. "You are not the first this town has turned on," he said. She said nothing. "I am not going to ask questions you do not wish to answer, but you are safe here, for as long as you desire to be." She turned her head to look at him. "Do you expect something in return for this?" He looked over, brow furrowed. "No. Men usually do. I am not most men." There was nothing more to be said after that. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling, stew bubbling, and Elias humming something low and melancholic, a tune that might have once had words but no longer did. Outside, thunder cracked again, louder this time. The storm rolled over the hills, and the night engulfed the town whole. In the morning, she would have to decide what came next. But for now, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she had not made a mistake stepping off that train. Perhaps not every man turned away from a woman who came with a little baggage and a lot of heart. And perhaps, in a town full of locked doors, one had opened just wide enough for hope to step through. The cabin exuded the scents of pine sap, smoke, and something rich simmering over the stove. Rachel stood just inside the entrance, her fingers still curled around the doorframe. Her dust-caked boots left soft imprints on the clean wooden floor. Behind her, the wind clawed at the darkness with dry hands, howling like a creature denied warmth. But here, inside, everything was still. Elias didn't speak. He moved with quiet assurance, ladling stew into 2 tin bowls. The firelight glinted off the curve of his jaw, catching in the stubble and lines etched deep by weather, work, or both. She hadn't said much since their arrival, just nodded when he gestured to the cot and sat stiff-backed on its edge. She kept her coat wrapped around her, even though the fire provided ample warmth. Her suitcase rested beside her like a nervous canine. He handed her the bowl and a spoon, then sat across from her at the table. No blessing was offered, no words exchanged, just the sound of two individuals eating in silence. It should have been uncomfortable. It wasn't. Elias's presence demanded nothing. That alone unsettled her more than if he had. Rachel took her first bite and blinked. This is good. Stew improves with prolonged cooking. She glanced around. The cabin was small but well maintained. Books lined a shelf above the hearth. A rifle hung on two hooks near the door. The bed in the far corner was neatly made, covered with a quilt of dark blues and grays, hand-stitched. Do you reside here alone? I do. For how long? A couple of years. She looked at him directly. You do not speak much, do you? He met her gaze with a shrug. People say enough without me contributing. She couldn't suppress a slight smile. And here I thought men out west were full of themselves. Some are, he said, but those are usually the ones with something to demonstrate. Rachel didn't inquire what he had to prove or what he was concealing, but the curiosity pricked at her just beneath the surface. She dismissed it, concentrating on eating. Each spoonful restored warmth to her bones. She hadn't realized how chilled she had become until it began to dissipate. When the bowl was empty, she placed it on the small table beside the cot and curled onto her side, her hand drifting instinctively to her belly. The baby moved again, restless, as it always was when she was near warmth. You can sleep there, Elias said, standing. I will take the chair. You do not have to. I know. He took the rifle from the wall, checked it without a word, then propped it near the door. His movements were second nature, routine. He wasn't doing it for display, which implied he thought there might be cause to use it. Rachel adjusted the pillow and let her eyes close, but sleep remained just out of reach. The cabin creaked in the wind. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Elias sat in the chair beside the fire, staring into the flames. After a time, she asked, Why did you help me? He didn't answer immediately. Because no one else did, he said finally. I don't know if I can trust you. You don't have to. She turned toward him, watching the profile of his face in the firelight. His jaw was tense, not with anger, but with restraint. The kind of man who carried unspoken burdens. I was supposed to marry him, she whispered. The father of my child. He died during a robbery at the Mercantile, shot trying to protect a stranger. Elias didn't look at her, but she knew he was listening. I wrote Horace, thinking maybe it was a way to start fresh. I never expected love, just a place, a roof, a chance to raise my child with dignity. And he called you damaged? Yes. Elias nodded slowly. Men like that believe dignity is something you acquire by being born correctly, wearing the proper attire, possessing the right surname. Rachel observed him for a long moment. What about you? She asked softly. What did you lose? Elias's eyes flickered towards her for the first time since she had begun speaking. Something raw passed through his gaze, but he looked back to the fire and said nothing. That was answer enough. The wind howled again. Rachel closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to feel weary without compunction. She slept more soundly than she had anticipated. When morning arrived, she awoke to the aroma of coffee and the sound of eggs frying in a pan. Light streamed through the single window, turning the room's edges golden. She sat up slowly, her hand on her belly. The child within was quiet, as if sleeping too. Elias handed her a plate. He looked as though he had been awake for hours. I could have prepared breakfast, she offered. You needed repose more. Are you always this considerate? Only with individuals who do not merit worse. Rachel ate more slowly than the previous night. The silence between them was different now, familiar. After breakfast, Elias pulled on his coat. Going to head into town, grab some supplies. Her heart jolted. Are you returning? He turned. Do you wish me to? She didn't answer, but something in her chest eased. Elias nodded. I'll be back by sundown. Lock the door behind me. As soon as he departed, the cabin felt larger, emptier. She wandered through it slowly, taking in every detail. A photograph tucked in a drawer, too worn to discern clearly, but she could make out a woman and a small boy. His son? His wife? He had said nothing of family. Later, Rachel swept the floor, washed the dishes, and rearranged the shelves. She worked because it helped her think, because it gave her something to hold on to in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. By mid-afternoon, clouds gathered. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She stepped outside, just as the first droplets fell. Elias returned as promised. His coat was soaked, and he carried 2 sacks of goods: flour, beans, coffee, and a length of linen. "Thought you might desire something to sew with," he said, setting it on the table. She looked at the fabric, pale blue, soft. "For the infant," he added. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." He pulled off his coat and hung it by the fire. The storm outside intensified. Rain fell in sheets. The wind rattled the windows. They spent the remainder of the day inside, conversing in fragments. Rachel learned Elias had previously been a ranch hand, that he had left a job in the East and never returned. He never mentioned the photograph, and she didn't inquire. After supper, she sat on the cot, mending a tear in her shawl. He carved something small from a piece of pine, his hand steady, patient. The quiet between them was tranquil. Rachel couldn't recall the last time she had experienced anything approaching peace. "You can remain here as long as you desire," Elias said suddenly. She looked up. "I mean it. No obligation, no anticipations. Merely a place to rest, raise your child, if that is your wish." Rachel set her sewing down. "You do not even know me." "I know sufficiently. You know I bring trouble." He offered a faint smile. "Do we not all?" A moment passed. She asked, "Do you ever ponder if individuals like us, people the world discards, perhaps we encounter each other for a purpose?" Elias did not smile at that, but he nodded. "I believe the world is too harsh for coincidences." Rachel said nothing further. Her hand drifted to her belly again, and she whispered something only the child could hear. Outside, the rain subsided. Inside, something had shifted, soft as breath, strong as a vow. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, Rachel Bell, abandoned, rejected, and labeled damaged, had begun to wonder if she had stumbled not into another misstep, but into something rare. A quiet kind of refuge, the commencement of a life not constructed on fear or survival, but on choice. She watched Elias as he carved in the firelight and felt, just for an instant, secure. But security in the West never arrived without a cost, and some obligations always came due. The town's inhabitants had always subsisted on gossip, much like wolves on raw flesh, voracious, untidy, and with no regard for the remnants they left behind. Rachel Bell, once a stranger alighting from a train, had now become the focal point of every whispered exchange that lingered like smoke in the corners of saloons, the pews of churches, and the porches where idle hands feigned mending. The narrative altered with each retelling. To some, she was a dissolute woman who had deceived 2 men and eluded justice. To others, a fiend in feminine attire, concealing sin behind a gentle countenance. A few simply pitied her, though not enough to voice their support, and certainly not enough to stand in solidarity with her. Elias knew the instant he entered town that week. Heads turned more swiftly, voices dropped lower. Even the sheriff, a man who seldom concerned himself with small-town hearsay, pulled Elias aside in front of the post office. "Are you causing disturbances, Hart?" Sheriff Crane inquired, pushing his hat back and squinting at the sky as if the sun might provide an answer. Elias wouldn't. "I am minding my own affairs," Elias stated flatly. "Horace Keeler has been informing people you are cohabiting with his intended. Says you took what is rightfully his. She is not his. That holds no significance for the sort of men who follow Horace," the sheriff cautioned. "They are not much concerned with facts, only loud voices and volatile tempers." Elias's eyes narrowed, his jaw tensing. "If they come for her, they will encounter me first." "I do not doubt you," Crane muttered, stepping back. "Just remarking, I have witnessed good men interred because they contended with the wrong kind of folly." He walked off, but Elias lingered a while longer in the street, his shoulders drawn tight beneath his coat, his eyes hard under the brim of his hat. The town had changed. He could sense it in the ground, like a storm brewing beneath the surface. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sky was already darkening. Rachel met him at the door, her sleeves rolled up, her hands flour-dusted. She had been baking biscuits by their aroma, and her cheeks were flushed with heat and effort. "You were gone longer than usual," she remarked. He brushed past her, set down the sack of provisions. Encountered the sheriff. Her hands stilled. What did he communicate? "The same tidings the winds have been carrying for days. Trouble is imminent." Rachel exhaled slowly and turned back to the stove, but the tension in her shoulders did not abate. "Perhaps we should depart." "No." Elias's answer came too swiftly. He softened it with, "This place. It is yours now. Ours, if you desire it. I will not permit them to drive us from it." She offered no response, but when she served him supper, her hands trembled slightly. That night, as he sat carving a block of cedar into a form he had not yet determined, Rachel spoke from the cot. "I dreamt last night the cabin was aflame. I could not locate you. I was alone with the infant, and the smoke. It was dense, suffocating." Elias did not lift his eyes. Dreams are merely thoughts that have gone astray, or premonitions. He looked up at her, saw the apprehension swimming behind her voice. She did not frighten easily, but the town, the people, what they could accomplish with sufficient animosity and too little conscience, that was a different sort of peril. That was fear honed into action. He set down the carving and checked the rifle by the door. That night, neither of them slept. 2 days later, the fire arrived. It commenced as a whisper in the darkness. Rachel awoke to the scent, acrid, bitter, unmistakable. Smoke. Her eyes snapped open, her heart already racing. In the next instant, she heard the crackling outside the window, followed by the soft, insidious roar of flames licking wood. "Elias!" she shouted. He was already at the door, half-dressed, his eyes wide and alert. The fire had enveloped the rear of the cabin, flames leaping from the brush, feeding on the dry tinder of summer, as if it had awaited this moment all season. "Back door!" he yelled, grabbing the rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. Rachel struggled to her feet, one arm wrapped around her belly. The smoke was thick now, curling through the gaps in the windows, reaching in with hot fingers. Elias grabbed her suitcase and threw open the door. The heat struck like a wave. They ran. Ash rained from the sky. The world was a blur of orange and black, like some malevolent oil painting brought to chaotic life. Rachel coughed violently, her legs nearly failing her. Elias stayed close, his hand on her elbow, guiding her away from the inferno that had once been their home. Behind them, the cabin groaned, a sound like splintering ribs. Rachel turned just in time to see the roof collapse, sparks exploding into the night sky like fireworks born from hell. They reached the tree line, breathless, lungs scorched, clothes smudged with soot. Elias pulled her down behind a boulder and scanned the horizon. "Someone did this," Rachel gasped. "It wasn't an accident." Elias offered no reply, but his silence was more weighty than any affirmation. In his eyes she saw it. Rage, buried deep beneath restraint. Whoever had perpetrated this had intended for them to perish in that blaze. "Horace," she breathed, "or one of his." Elias said grimly, "He's been agitating the town." Rachel trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. "They meant to kill us." "You and the infant," Elias corrected quietly. "They have no concern for me." She gritted her teeth. "I care." His eyes flicked to hers, startled by the edge in her voice. They did not return to the ruins until dawn. The fire had consumed everything. The walls, the cot, the books, the quilt, all gone. Only a few blackened posts stood, stubborn and skeletal against the pale sky. Elias sifted through the rubble, retrieving what he could. His revolver, half buried and charred, a tin cup, the blade he had been carving with. Rachel picked through the ashes near where the kitchen had been. Beneath a pile of scorched wood, her fingers touched something hard, a rifle. She pulled it free, coughing as soot coated her palms. The weapon was old but well cared for. The initials etched into the wood were faint but still legible. E.H. She turned to Elias, holding it up. His face darkened. You were not meant to discover that. She didn't press, but her mind whirled. Who were you? She asked quietly. It does not signify. I believe it does. Elias ran a hand down his jaw. I was an individual who committed regrettable actions. That name no longer pertains to me. And yet, she said, brushing ash from the initials, it remains yours. He looked at her then, truly looked, and whatever he perceived there caused him to sigh and seat himself on one of the burned logs. I rode with a company once, young and foolish. Thought I could carve a name out of the world with grit and a firearm. Got people injured, innocents. I departed before I became like the worst of them. But the name still follows. Rachel sat beside him, her belly pressing against her knees. I do not care what your name used to be, she said. I care about the man who saved me, who gave me shelter, who did not ask questions. He glanced at her sideways. Even now? She nodded. Especially now. He stared out at the ruins of the cabin. We can rebuild. She offered a small smile. You are not surrendering? Never have. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried out across the canyon. They departed that day, heading into town with soot still in their hair and blistered hands wrapped around each other for strength. Elias walked with the rifle slung across his back, Rachel steady beside him, the baby kicking softly beneath her ribs. When they reached the town's edge, every eye turned towards them. The whispers began immediately, but Rachel didn't flinch. She met those stares with her chin high and her eyes bright. Sheriff Crane stepped forward from the boardwalk, his eyes roving over the blackened soot still clinging to them. Jesus, he muttered. They really tried. Elias just nodded. Do you know who? The sheriff asked. It doesn't matter, Elias said. Not yet. Rachel spoke up, her voice stronger than ever before. I want a roof over our heads and the names of those who stood watching when Horace stirred the mob. Crane's eyebrows lifted. You desire justice? I desire peace, she said. But I am willing to fight for it. He tipped his hat. Then let us begin with a place to stay. They moved into a one-room cabin on the edge of town, vacant for years but with sound structure. Townsfolk watched, uncertain, but the sentiment had shifted. A few delivered food. Someone brought nails and timber. Not everyone was cruel. At night, Elias stood at the porch's edge, observing the horizon. Rachel joined him, her belly pressing forward, enveloped in Elias's coat. They will not cease, will they? She inquired. No, he said, but neither will we. And that was the truth. The fire had not broken them. It had revealed them. And the next time someone attempted to suppress them, they would be prepared. The wind carried heat that day, dry and sharp, as if it had been honed against the canyon walls before sliding into town. Dust eddied across the wooden planks of the main street, catching in the folds of skirts and the creases of old men's eyes. Something was imminent. Everyone sensed it. Rachel Bell stood outside the newly reconstructed cabin at the town's periphery, her belly full and round beneath a faded blue dress. Her hand rested lightly upon it, fingers curled as if already shielding the child within. She watched the trail, her heart thumping against her ribs with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Elias Hart stood beside her, rifle slung over one shoulder, his jaw set like stone. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were darker than usual, not with fear, but with resolve. That kind of stare that came from a man who had witnessed bloodshed, survived it, and was prepared to shed more if necessary. They are coming, Rachel said. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just waited. A cloud of riders materialized over the hill, like a contusion on the horizon. 8 men, all armed. At their center rode Horace Keeler, clean-shaven and smiling like the devil himself, in a white hat. His boots were polished, his coat gleamed, but his eyes were vacant. Behind them, townsfolk gathered at windows, behind curtains and half-cracked doors. The streets emptied, the air changed. Rachel felt it in her blood. So did the baby. A single kick, hard and sudden. "You can go inside," Elias said quietly. "No," she replied. "This is my fight too." He looked at her. There was no room for argument. The riders slowed to a trot, then dismounted as one. Horace approached with a calm stroll, his hands visible, his voice unctuous. "Well, well, ain't this a picturesque scene? Little Miss Bell, standing proud as a monarch on a heap of cinders. Thought you'd have learned your lesson by now." Rachel's voice was steady. "That you cannot extinguish a spirit that does not fear you?" Horace chuckled. "You always did possess a sharp tongue. I wager that landed you in considerable trouble back east." Elias shifted beside her, one step forward. "That's far enough." Horace looked him up and down. "Do you genuinely believe you are going to keep her? That infant? You possess no name, no land, no legal standing behind you." "I possess enough. I am here to claim what is rightfully mine," Horace declared, his voice louder now so the town could hear. "She was promised to me. I have letters, contracts. This is lawful." Rachel stepped forward. "You tore those letters up before a crowd. You deceived me. I informed you I was a widow. You presumed that meant pristine and unencumbered." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I am not unencumbered. I am not ashamed. And you, Horace Keeler, you are a craven, hiding behind documents because you cannot stand beside a woman who is stronger than you will ever be." The men behind Horace shifted uneasily. One of them glanced towards the crowd that was beginning to gather, quiet but watchful. "You cannot address me in that manner," Horace barked. Rachel's hand tightened over her stomach. "I just did." "Enough," Horace snapped. He turned to Elias. "This is your final opportunity. Relinquish her, or I shall take her." Elias exhaled slowly and unslung the rifle from his shoulder. "Attempt it." The moment fractured like a dry branch. One of Horace's men drew. Elias moved first. The rifle barked once. The shooter dropped with a scream, clutching his thigh. Another reached for his holster. Elias was already upon him. 2 shots rang out, quick, clean. One hit the man's shoulder, the second drove the other back. The crowd gasped, but no one fled. No one aided Horace either. Elias advanced. Rachel stood behind him, lips pressed tight, heart pounding. Horace stumbled back, hands up. "Now you'll hang for this." "No," Elias said, low and cold. "I will not." Sheriff Crane stepped out from the saloon, rifle in hand, jaw tight. "This is finished, Horace. He shot my men." "They drew first," the sheriff said. "And I witnessed it. Hell, the entire town witnessed it." Horace paled, his bluster evaporating like water on hot iron. You cannot do this." "I am not doing anything," Crane stated. "You brought this upon yourself." The townsfolk were emerging now, not in fear, but in solidarity. Old misses. Richter, the butcher, and his son, even the schoolteacher. All of them had watched Rachel humiliated, then nearly killed, then rebuild what was lost. Now they stood with her. "You can depart," Rachel said, her voice unwavering. "You can depart and acknowledge your defeat, or you can try again and discover just how much fight remains in a woman you labeled ruined." Horace looked at them all, the rifle in Elias's hand, the resolve in Rachel's eyes, the quiet menace in the crowd's presence, and for the first time, he appeared insignificant. He turned and walked away, his men following, one limping, another cursing. No one assisted them. When they were gone, silence returned. Then a slow ripple of movement as people returned to their lives, but not before a few of them tipped their hats or muttered quiet thanks. The tide had shifted. Rachel was no longer an outsider. She was someone they respected. perhaps even feared a little, and that was acceptable. Later that evening, Rachel sat on the porch, her feet up, her hand gently stroking her belly. "Do you believe he will return?" she inquired. Elias stood beside her, whittling a small piece of wood into something that resembled a rocking horse. "Perhaps," he said, "but if he does, it will not conclude in the same manner." Rachel looked out at the twilight settling over the hills. "I was so terrified, Elias, not just of him, but of never being seen, never being wanted." "You were seen," he said softly. "By the wrong individuals, perhaps. But I saw you. I still do." She reached out, touched his hand. "And I see you too. Not the past, not the name you fled from, the man you chose to become." He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around hers. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, a quiet reminder of everything still ahead. When the sun dipped below the ridge, a peace settled that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with belonging. Real, honest belonging. Weeks passed. The child was born on a stormy morning, screaming and red-faced, with fists like firecrackers. A girl, strong, healthy, loud. Rachel named her Hope. Elias held her with hands that once knew only weapons and now cradled life. He whispered things no one else heard, things only a father would say. They built more than a dwelling. They built an existence, one where her name was no longer uttered with pity or disdain, one where his past no longer cast shadows. And the legend spread quietly at first, then louder, of the woman who stood her ground, the man with no name who found it again through love, the fire that couldn't consume them, the town that changed because they chose to fight. In a corner of the West where cruelty once held sway, something else took root, a new name, a new family, a new legend. And it all began with a woman no one wanted and a man who finally saw her.